Hello everybody, this is Tip-Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be looking at some custom Magic the Gathering cards made by the community of Magic the Gathering, mostly on r/custom magic, but we have something a little bit new today, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. But essentially, I'm going to be looking at 10 cards, and I'm going to tell you what I think about them. Not all of them are perfect, but these are some of the most popular ones on r/custom magic. And yeah, we're going to talk about what makes them so interesting, and it kind of just gets, it's that feeling of spoiler season, but without the, spoiler season part of it. So why don't we just jump right into this? Starting off, before I can jump into this, I should say, you can see the Reddit user who designed the cards in the upper left-hand corner. I did not design any of them in this video. I do have videos where there are my designs, but this video is all about featuring the awesome work that the creators of custom magic cards are doing. So yeah, let's jump right into this. This is Diamond of Devotion. It's a 0-cost artifact, and it says this spell costs 1 more to cast for each color in your commander's color identity. And then you can tap and add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Alright, so the idea here is that if you're running a 5-color deck, this is a 5-cost artifact that taps to add 1 mana of any color. So it is not that good. It's actually not even that good. It's awful. But if you're in a 1-color deck, say you are in white, this is an amazing card. So I think that it definitely is a powerful card, and I think that it is designed in a really interesting way, because if you give low cost, the ability to kind of have... This one's really difficult to me because it progressively gets more expensive as it becomes more valuable, because it can tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Now, in a 5-color deck, that means you're paying a 5 mana for an artifact that can tap to add 1 color of any color. But if you're in a, for instance, mono-color deck, this is a 1-cost artifact that taps to add a color the turn it comes in. So I think if this entered the battlefield tapped, it would be a little bit more fair. Or maybe if it cost 1 and then, it would cost 2 in a 1-color deck, 3 in a 2-color deck. But then at that point, it's like, it just, for me, at 1 mana, it seems really crazy. I'm just not sure about it. Like, it's one of those things where I would really need to play with this, but just the prospect of, like, are there any artifacts out there, Soul Ring kind of being an exception here, where it's like 1 cost and it taps for 1, and it's like, yeah, probably, but I don't know. I think this one is very powerful in those monocolor decks, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe those monocolor decks need a little bit of a boost to be able to, have that advantage over the multicolor. Because one of the things about Commander, I mean, outside of the fact that there's the color identity rule, is like adding more colors really isn't that much of a downside. There are enough lands where you're but you're rarely going to be punished for having more colors. And so that oftentimes means when a commander is monocolored, it is not that great. But when you have cards that reward monocolored or devotion, I think it's definitely very interesting. So yeah, I'm very torn on this card. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments down below. Now this one is called Shielded by the Sun. It is a 3-cost white enchantment, and it says whenever a creature attacks you, it becomes exerted. So I thought this was a really interesting design. So it's kind of that traditional tap things down, it doesn't untap, but instead it's using the exerted mechanic, which essentially means that it doesn't untap during its opponent's next untap. So for instance, normally when you attack with a creature, you can exert it as it attacks, and it gets a bonus effect. What it would do is whenever a creature attacks you, it becomes exerted. So if it has something that says when it becomes exerted, that triggers. So that might not be a good thing. But it also means that then they don't get to attack with it. So it means it's a stacks card that means that every creature attacks every other turn. Now this, in my opinion, is kind of a crazy card just because of the fact that it is asymmetrical. It's not whenever a creature attacks, it becomes exerted. I think that would be a lot more appropriate and fair, but I think for something, again, like Commander, I think this is more appropriate. But, stack decks are obviously not my favorite, and I know a lot of people don't like stack decks, so I don't know if I necessarily want this card, but I think it works very well. All right, this next one is kind of special. So this one was not posted to Reddit. This was posted by someone on my Discord, and I don't really advertise this too often, but I do have a Discord down in the description of every video where you can go check that out. And what we do is we talk about Magic. Sometimes make some announcements on there. We talk a lot about custom cards. So if you want to check that out, it is really, really fun. And I have a spot where you can submit custom cards for me to review. So I took 2 custom cards. So this is one of them from those submissions, and we're going to be talking about them here today. So the first one is this Modal double face card. The software Magic set editor does not have the ability to do the frame of them, but this is a Modal double face card. So on one side it is Karios, God of Revenge. It is a 3-cost black legendary creature dragon god 4/3 with flying and menace. So right off the bat, it's a pretty good, creature, 4/3 for 3 with flying and menace. And then it says whenever it attacks, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 3/3 black demon creature token with, when this creature dies, create a voodoo token. So I just want to kind of analyze this on its own. Just like, let's take a look at this card. I think that it is a very, very powerful card just for the fact that it is a 4/3 flying menace that has the ability to create a 3/3 for 2 mana every time it attacks. So that is a lot for 3. And, I think that it could be something that sees print, but I think when you add the double face card, it's just a little powerful. But I think that, honestly, when you're designing custom cards, it is so hard to design for power level. I mean, you have to really think about all the uses of it, and sometimes, the effect, you're balancing for the effect, and, we have things like Oko. This is not as good as Oko. But, it is something to keep in mind. And then the other side is Kira, God of the Dark. It is a 4-cost black and red legendary creature spirit god 4/4 with flying and menace, and it has a triumph. So it says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, draw a card. And then it says sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Kira, God of the Dark. So yeah, on that side, we have something that is very, very interesting in my opinion. It is encouraging you to both sacrifice your creatures and also encouraging you to kill your opponents, which I mean, that makes a lot of, or kill your opponent's creatures, I should say. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think both cards make sense, especially because if you're creating the demons with Kairos, then you're also wanting to sack them to get those voodoo tokens. And then, yeah, I think it's definitely a very interesting design. I might bump up the mana cost, maybe of both of them by 1, or maybe make both of them cost 4. I also think the other solution is just to make Karios not a 4/3 and make it like a 2/3. I think that would honestly balance the card pretty well. But yeah, I think that the overall design works really well. Both cards want to play in the same similar area, and you would want to play Kairos and then Kira right after that. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I really like it. Next, we have Unistorm. It is a 2-cost white creature elemental unicorn 2/2, and it has prowess. And when it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other spell cast this turn. So it's very similar to like a storm effect. What's interesting is it's kind of like pre-prowess with that, except it's entering with counters instead of being boosted, where prowess boosted up temporarily for each non-creature spell. This one puts counters on it, so it's a little more permanent, but it counts with things that happened before it. Now, I do want to say, first off, it does not say each spell you cast, so that's pretty cool. And then second, this is on an adventure, and the other one is Lightning Bridge. It is a 1-cost red instant. The next spell you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash, which, by the way, means Unistorm can be cast at instant speed for 3 mana. And if it is cast for 3 mana, you would have already cast 1 spell, being Lightning Bridge, meaning that it'll enter as a 3/3. So you can pay 3 mana to get a 3/3, or 2 mana to get a 2/2, which I think is really interesting. But on top of that, Prowess works really well in an adventure deck, where most things are going to have instants and sorceries attached to them. So I think this is just wonderful design. It doesn't seem overpowered necessarily. I think the fact that things can get instant speed is pretty cool. But yeah, I definitely think the applications of this are really, really, really awesome. And I think that the synergy between the adventure and the creature is amazing. And honestly, I love the 2 cards on 1 card effect, because oftentimes there are such great synergies. Like we saw with the Modal double face card. They work really well together. This one works really well together. So I love that kind of design. And I think it shows that some of the most upvoted ones on Reddit are oftentimes cards like these, where they synergize really well with itself. Next, we have the Axolotl Lotus. It is a green or a blue for a legendary creature Salamander 0/1, and it says it has all mana abilities of all other permanents you control. So if you have something that says tap, add green, it gains that ability. Or if you have something that says tap, add 1 mana of any color, it also gains that ability. And while we're speaking on that, as long as you have Wooburg in your mana pool, you and permanents you control have hexproof. So I think that's really, really interesting. It is encouraging you to keep mana in your mana pool. Or it's almost like an ability, but not an ability. It is like, you know, it would be like if this thing had pay Wooburg, all your stuff gains hexproof, but you can pay Wooburg, all your stuff gains hexproof, and then spend that Wooburg mana, and then as soon as you spend the Wooburg mana, the hexproof goes away. So I think it's a really interesting design that cares a little bit more about what mana is in your mana pool, and we don't really see that often. So I definitely think this is really interesting. You'd play this with cards like Crewfix, and you'd probably build this as like a Voltron-y deck. But yeah, I think this would be really interesting. And I think, honestly, you could almost replace Hexproof with Shroud. And I know they don't print Shroud anymore, but I think that also leads to some interesting design where you want to have Wooburg, but if you want to start targeting your stuff, you got to drop below Wooburg and then maybe go back up to Wooburg when you want to protect it. And I think that's really, really fun. And obviously, it gaining mana abilities means that it can more easily, you can easily get up to Wooburg. Next, we have Equality. It is a 2-cost white legendary enchantment. If an opponent would draw a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, they may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, that player skips that draw. And then you can pay 5 and each opponent draws a card. So let's talk about what this card does in essence. Essentially, because, it can be a little... At first I was like, what does this do? Essentially, what it does is it says whenever anyone draws a card, if it's not the first one they've drawn in turn, so if they draw a card outside of their draw step, essentially what you're going to do is say, hey, you have 2 options. Either you draw the card and I get a card, or neither of us draw a card. So essentially it's saying that, hey, whatever's happening to you, it's happening to me. Either you're not drawing this card and I'm not drawing this card, or you're drawing this card and I'm drawing this card. And I think that's really interesting. I think for 2 mana, it's a little cheap. I would maybe move it up to 3. But then again, they also... if your opponent's not doing that, then nothing's happening. So I do think at 2, this actually works pretty well. So what you're saying that this next ability, pay 5 each opponent to draw a card, is not amazing. Why? Because, okay, let's say we're in a commander game, and you have 3 opponents, you pay 5 mana, haha, your plan's gonna work. Literally all of your opponents can just always say no, and then you just spend 5 mana to do nothing. Now, you could get that opponent that does say yes, but paying 5 mana to make you draw a card and your opponent doesn't seem too amazing. In white, that isn't bad, but I think if it said each player draws a card, I think it would still be fair. But I don't know. We would have to. I would really have to see this one in battle. And it obviously this one could be like literally a dead card in some games. So I think for that reason, I think it's pretty balanced. But yeah, I think it's an interesting way to do white card draw. Next, we have Unrepentant Thief. It is a 2-cost blue or black creature, elf, rogue, 1/2, and it says whenever you cast a spell you don't own, draw a card. We really don't have a lot of, we have cards that steal things from your opponents, but we don't have a lot of cards that encourage you to do it by giving you other effects, and I think this is really interesting. You throw this in decks where, you like exile the top cards of the library and cast it, and lots of really fun stuff. I just thought it was really interesting that we haven't really seen a lot of this, and I thought it was kind of cool design for that reason. It is simple, but I like it. Next, we have the World Turtle. This is another one created by Steve399 over on the Discord. So yeah, this is a 9-cost 4 and Wooburg legendary creature turtle god 10/10. So it's a 10/10 for 9. That's completely fair, especially when it's Wooburg in there. It has haste, flying, trample, and hexproof. So when this thing comes down, you're probably going to get hit for a lot. You do need at least an 11/11 trampler or 11/11 flyer, and you need that the turn it comes out. So for that reason, I think it's already not an amazing card, because obviously anything that costs 9, but it has more abilities. Whenever a legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card and gain 2 life. So yeah, you are going to kind of... This includes itself, by the way. So when it DTBs, you're going to draw a card. And then if you can keep playing legendary stuff, you keep drawing cards and gaining life, which I think is still completely fair. And then you can tap and add Wooburg, spend this mana to only cast legendary spells or activate abilities of legendary permanents. So it is adding Wooburg, but of course you can use that for generic mana cost in there. So yeah, I think this is fairly appropriate. The one big, I guess, issue I have with it necessarily is that when you play it, you can then immediately tap it for 5 mana. But then again, we're talking about something that costs 9 mana. Expropriate is sitting up there at 9 mana. And I'm like, is this better than Expropriate? No. I don't think it is. So, and this also is much harder to cast. It's not just double blue. So I think this is fair for Commander. In Standard, it'd be a bit much. And of course, this would be something that would be hastily cheated out onto the board by things like Joda and other cards that do care about cheating things onto the board. But I definitely think it is a fun card. And, you know, Commander, if you're worrying about printing big things that are going to get cheated on the board, you're never going to print anything fun. So I think that this would be completely fine outside of Standard just because of its high mana cost. Next, we have the Imposter. It is a 4-cost blue legendary planeswalker, and the Imposter is every planeswalker type at all times. So it essentially has Changeling. So it is a Jace, it is a Garruk, which means cards like the Elf Saga, I don't remember the name of it, from Kaldheim, that allow you to look for a Tyvar card from among the top 6 will also let you look for this. Or, for instance, Garruk from Throne of Eldraine lets you put counters on Garruk planeswalkers. Well, this is a Garruk planeswalker. And then you can pay +1 him to create a 1/1 shapeshifter with Changeling. So, yep, really great in a tribal deck. And then -1, Imposter gains all loyalty abilities of other Planeswalker cards on the battlefield and in graveyards until end of turn. You may activate another loyalty ability of it. So, I would say big issue here, but it is only gaining loyalty abilities, so this is kind of like a Nico Bolas effect. I think it makes sense. I think the fact that we only have one card that steals Planeswalker abilities, I think that's going to change fairly soon, and I think this does it fairly elegantly. I mean, you're -1ing him, meaning he's going down to 2 loyalty if you're doing this the turn he comes out, meaning you better have some good effects. Otherwise, you know, that's kind of bad. But the thing is, if you are like targeting something in your graveyard that you milled, that's pretty good. And second off, you can be getting some crazy, like, you can -1 him to then +3 him. So you are technically still gaining loyalty. So I think for that reason, he is pretty interesting. I think there's just a lot of interesting applications you can do with him. And when I don't cover Planeswalkers a lot because they're not my favorite card type, especially to design and talk about, because a lot of the time it's just +1 card advantage, minus ability removal, ultimate win the game. But I think when you do something interesting like this, it definitely piques my interest. Next, we have Kulin, the Deflecting Palm. It is a 3-cost white legendary creature, human monk, 2/3 with vigilance, and you can tap, and until end of turn, if a creature would deal damage to Kulin, instead it deals that much damage to itself. So if a 5/5 attacks into Kulin, you block it, it does 5 damage to itself. It's a very good blocker, and it's because it has vigilance, it'll also do that on attack if you tap him. And then you can pay a blue and a red and tap and change the target of target spell or ability that targets only Kulin. So it's very hard to kill this guy. He is going to essentially say, hey, if you hit me, you're killing yourself. And if you target me with a spell, I can change the ability to target something else. So I definitely think that's an interesting effect. It is very hard to deal with, and I think it's an interesting way for white to do some combat stuff. Alright guys, that is going to do it for this video. I want to know what you guys thought about all of these cards in the comments down below. Again, if you want to, submit cards for me to check out or just talk about Magic in general, check out my Discord in the description down below, and I will see you guys in the next video.